They sent Evara Lune beneath the dragon court before the banquet wine had cooled with a chain around her wrist and the ledger of dead names pressed against her breast. It was not a burial list. It was an inventory of what the court had decided could no longer answer. Not prison. Worse. The Morath Lantern Crypt. A place reserved for thieves who had stolen royal flame traitors whose ashes were too impure for burial and women the court wished to forget without staining the execution stones. Arch-lanterner Vosrin Hale walked ahead of her with a ring of black keys at his belt and a white lantern rod in his hand. The rod had no flame. None of the rods in Morath carried flame. Fire was for the living halls above, for dragon banners and oath braziers and the golden throat of the king. Down here, flame was considered an insult. The lanterns were dead by law, and dead by law did not always mean dead by truth. Count them aloud, Vosrin said. Evara stood at the mouth of the crypt and looked into the dark. Hundreds of ember lanterns hung from chains that vanished into the stone ceiling. Some were shaped like ribs, some like closed flowers, some like cages meant for birds that had never learned to sing. Every lantern was black inside its glass, smoked from a fire that had died long before her birth. A thin red dust covered the floor made from years of old ash and iron scraped from the chains. Behind her, 6 court witnesses waited on the stair wrapped in winter blue velvet and moral satisfaction. Lady Soreth of the Eastern Wing held a perfumed cloth over her nose. 2 lesser lantern scribes stood with ink ready. A punishment could be disputed if no one heard the count. A woman could be erased more cleanly if her own voice helped record the erasure. Evara did not ask why they needed witnesses for dead lanterns. She already knew. A punishment done privately could become mercy. A punishment witnessed became history. Vosrin turned his pale face sharpened by the blue mineral light in the stairwell. You were found guilty of stealing 1 measure of royal heart flame from His Majesty's recovery chamber. The sentence was burial service in Morath until every dead ember lantern has been counted, named, and marked. If one is miscounted, the service begins again. Lady Soreth gave a soft laugh. How many lanterns are there? Vosrin did not smile. No one has finished the count. Because no count could end while 1 living flame remained unnamed. The witnesses shifted with pleasure. Evara looked down at the ledger in her arms. Its leather cover was cracked black, stamped with the seal of the dragon court, a crowned dragon curled around a heart of fire. Beneath it, in Vosrin's narrow hand, someone had written her sentence. Evara Lune, flame thief. Buried service. The word sat calmly on the page as if ink had never lied. She felt the old wound beneath her left ribs tighten. Not from fear. From memory. 7 years ago, she had smelled burning silk and poison in the royal healing chamber. She had been 18 then, not yet a servant of the lower lantern houses, only a quiet assistant trained to trim blue fire lamps and carry warmed ash for the healers. Dragon King Kaedric Mor had been dragged in half-dead after the assassination attempt at the Ember procession, his armor split open, his chest blackened where a blade of dead iron had struck too near the heart. His heart flame had been leaving him. Not blood, not breath, flame. It had spilled from him like gold, trying to remember the sun. The healers had panicked. The priests had prayed too loudly. The old court physicians had argued over forbidden methods while their king died between them. Evara had done the only thing that was not argument. She caught what was leaving. She took the burning into herself. No one had asked why a servant girl collapsed beside the king's bed that night. No one had asked why Kaedric Mor woke at dawn with a living body and a strange, uneven silence in his chest. No one had asked why Evara's skin never warmed properly again or why candle flames bent toward her when she passed. The court record had asked only one question: who stole royal flame, and Vosrin Hale had answered it for them. Begin, he said now. Evara lifted her chin. Her dignity had become a small private thing over the years. Not a crown. Not a weapon. Nothing bright enough for the court to notice and break. It lived in how she held a ledger, without trembling, in how she answered only what law required, in how she kept her pain from becoming entertainment. She stepped into Morath Lantern Crypt. The first chain swung slightly as she passed, though there was no wind below the court. Evara raised the ledger and looked at the nearest lantern. A number had been carved into its metal throat. 1, she said. A scribe scratched the mark. The lantern did not move. 2. Scratch. 3. Scratch. Her voice carried strangely through the crypt, swallowed by ash and returned thinner. With every number, the court witnesses seemed more bored. That was another cruelty of punishments designed to last. The beginning had ceremony. The suffering itself was left to silence. Evara counted until her throat dried. 47, 82, 119. The deeper she walked, the colder the crypt became. Not winter cold. This cold had no season in it. It seemed to come from old decisions, from names written too late, and truth sealed too well. The lanterns near the back hung lower than the rest, their chains thick with frost, though no water had ever reached Morath's deepest vault. Vossrin followed at a measured distance. He did not watch the lanterns. He watched her hands, Evara noticed. She always noticed the thing powerful men thought no one would see. The tightening of a jaw. The pause before a lie. The way Vossrin's white lantern rod never pointed toward the back wall, though that was where the oldest chains hung. 166, she said. A faint sound moved through the crypt. Not a voice, not a chain. Something softer. The witnesses on the stair did not hear it. One of them whispered about the banquet continuing without them. Another complained of the cold. The scribes dipped their pens again. Evara's fingers closed harder around the ledger. 167. There it was again. A dull, buried thud. Vossrin stopped walking. Evara did not turn. She let her eyes travel across the row before her. Most of the lanterns were black as old teeth, but at the far end of the chain line, one lantern hung apart from the others, almost hidden behind a curtain of iron links. No number marked it. The glass was not smoked. It was clear. Clear glass in Morath meant one thing: someone had hidden a living custody inside a dead archive. Inside rested an ember no larger than a clenched fist, dark red at its center, covered by a thin crust of gray ash. Her wound beneath the ribs pulled so sharply that she nearly bent. Vossrin saw. Not that one, he said. The witnesses looked up. Evara kept her gaze on the unnumbered lantern. It is in the crypt. It is exempt from count. There is no exemption written in the sentence. Vossrin's hand tightened around the lantern rod. A small thing. A private betrayal of nerves. You will count what I name countable. Evara turned then. For 7 years, she had bowed to survive. Bowed to pass through kitchens where noble women lowered their voices when she entered. Bowed when guards searched her sleeves for stolen flame that had never been there. Bowed when Kaedric Mor crossed a hall above her and did not recognize the woman whose body had kept death from finishing its work. But the crypt had changed something. Or perhaps the heartbeat in the dark had. The sentence says, "Every dead ember lantern," she said. If that one is not dead, the court should hear it. If it is dead, I will count it. A silence settled. Lady Soreth lowered her perfumed cloth. The scribe stopped writing. Vossrin's face lost all expression, which meant the fear had gone too deep for display. "Evara Lune," he said. Softly. "Do not reach for that lantern." She looked at the white rod in his hand. Why? The word moved through Morath like a thrown blade. Why? No one had let her keep that question after the accusation. Why had the king's flame been unguarded? Why had the assassination blade reached a chamber only 3 officials could open? Why had the recovery record been sealed before sunrise? Why had Vossrin Hale, a man with no healing rank, been the Curzon Hale, first to name her thief? Above them faintly the banquet horns sounded. The Dragon Court was celebrating the 7th year of Kaedric Mor's survival. Evara stepped toward the hidden lantern. Vossrin lunged. Not with the rod. With his bare hand. That was how she knew. He forgot the witnesses. Forgot dignity. Forgot the careful distance of a man who had spent years letting law do his violence for him. His fingers shot toward her wrist, as if touching the lantern would not merely break a rule but open a grave. Evara moved faster. She did not run. She did not gasp. She simply shifted the ledger into the path of his hand and let his palm strike the written sentence. The black seal on the cover flared. Vossrin recoiled with a curse. The witnesses cried out. Evara reached the unnumbered lantern and touched the glass. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the ember inside struck once against the dark. Thud. Every chain in Morath trembled. The scribes dropped their pens. Lady Soreth stumbled backward against the stair rail. Vosrin went white to the lips. The ember struck again. Thud. This time Evara felt it inside her own chest. Not under her ribs, where her borrowed pain had lived for 7 years, but deeper. A place she had forced herself not to name. The buried flame inside her answered with such sudden heat that tears sprang to her eyes before she could stop them. The lantern brightened. Gold spread through the glass in thin veins, shaping itself around the ember like the chambers of a living heart. Not a symbol. Not a trick of light. A heart. Burning. Beating. Remembering. Not choosing her. Remembering the body that had carried its missing half. Above the crypt, something enormous crashed. The stairwell split with a line of red fire. From far overhead came the roar of a court thrown into panic. And then, through stone, through ash, through 7 years of silence, Evara heard Dragon King Kaedric Mor cry out as if his heart had finally found the place where it had been buried. But the lantern had not yet named who sealed a living royal heart inside a dead numbered crypt. The unnumbered lantern had answered Kaedric's heart, but it had not named who buried living royal flame inside Morath's dead archive. That was what kept Vosrin Hale from running. Not courage. Not innocence. A guilty man fled from accusation. A dangerous one stayed close enough to shape it. The arch-lanterner lifted his white rod with both hands. And the mineral light along the stair went thin and blue. Step away from the glass. Evara did not move. The chain around her wrist had tightened when the lantern began to beat. Not by magic. By the guard on the stair, who had recovered enough fear to remember cruelty. The iron bit into the bone beneath her thumb, and for one breath the pain almost pulled her attention away from the living gold inside the lantern. Almost. The heart-shaped ember beat again. Thud. Above them, the roar of the dragon court rolled across stone. Feet struck marble. Someone shouted for healers. Someone else screamed that the king had fallen. The banquet horns died one by one, not finishing their royal note, as if even music had realized the celebration had been built over a buried pulse. Lady Soreth pressed herself against the stair rail, no longer bored. Her perfumed cloth had fallen somewhere in the ash. One of the scribes knelt on the floor, trying to gather spilled ink with shaking fingers. The other stared at the unnumbered lantern, as though numbers themselves had betrayed him. Vosrin did not look upward when Kaedric cried out again. He looked at the ledger, then at Evara's hand. That was his fear-tell. Not the living lantern. Not the king's pain. The record. You have contaminated a dead archive, he said. Evara kept her palm against the clear glass. The heat inside did not burn her. It knew the shape of old suffering. It moved through her fingers like a memory, returning to a room it had been dragged from. No, she said. I have touched what your count refused to name. Vosrin's mouth hardened. Unnumbered lanterns cannot be tried through a convicted flame thief's touch. The sentence landed carefully. He gave it to the witnesses, not to her. A doctrine. A wall. A way to make the impossible sound improper. Lady Soreth seized it at once because frightened courts clung to language before they clung to truth. Yes. Yes, that is right. She is convicted. Her touch cannot open evidence against the crown. The crown, Evara asked quietly. The lantern beat under her hand. Vosrin's eyes flashed. Against royal recovery. Above them, something heavy struck the stair door. Once. The crypt shook. Ash fell from the chains in a red-brown whisper. Then came Kaedric Mor's voice, roarer than any court had ever heard it. Open Morath. The guards on the stair looked at Vosrin. That too was a record. The king commanded from above, but the men below waited for the keeper of the dead archive. Vosrin drew himself taller. Morath cannot be opened during active count. Another blow struck the upper door. Stone cracked but did not give way. Evara closed her eyes for half a breath. She knew what Kaedric could do. Everyone in Morath did. A dragon king did not need a key to enter his own underworld. He could tear the stair throat open. He could call black fire into the mortar and split the crypt from the palace root. He could rip every dead chain from the ceiling until the lanterns fell like dark fruit around her feet. But Kaedric did not tear the crypt open. If he broke Morath by command, Vosrin would call the flame unstable, and the record corrupted by royal panic. A king's rage could destroy the proof before it learned how to speak. The upper door groaned. Then Kaedric's voice came again, lower, this time controlled by force rather than calm. Arch, Lanterner, hail. I command lawful witness passage. The words changed the air. Not rescue. Procedure. Vosrin's face tightened. Evara watched him calculate which law could still be used as a knife. Morath was beneath the throne but older than most throne customs. It had dead lantern rules, archive rules, custody rules. A royal command could force a door. A lawful witness passage forced a record. He could not refuse without becoming part of what the crypt would remember. Witness passage, Vosrin said. Each syllable cold requires the convicted hand to leave the object under dispute. Evara's fingers remained on the glass. The heartbeat inside the lantern slowed, not weakened. Listening. She turned her head enough for the witnesses to see her face. She knew how she looked, pale from underground cold wrist, chained ash on the hem of her dress hair, coming loose from the severe knot forced on servants appearing before court record. No queen. No chosen bride. No hidden creature of prophecy waiting to blaze into power. Only the woman they had buried with the evidence. Read who sealed the heart flame here, she said. Vosrin went still. The words reached higher than the stare. A silence answered them from above, full of royal breath guards, healers, frightened nobles, and one dragon king trying not to let his pain become command. Read it, Kaedric said. Vosrin turned toward the stair. Your Majesty, unnumbered lanterns. Do not teach me what I did not know existed beneath my own court. The stair door opened. Not shattered. Opened. 3 black keys had turned in 3 locks each by a different guard whose hand shook hard enough to make the iron sing. The door swung inward, and Dragon King Kaedric Mor descended into Morath with one hand braced against the stone wall. He wore banquet armor, not war armor, black scale plates over a dark formal coat, a crown of ember iron, low on his brow, a cloak fastened at one shoulder with a dragon heart clasp. Above ground, that cloak made men kneel before the living symbol of Mor's line. Down here, under dead chains and ash dust, it looked suddenly too heavy. His face was colorless. His other hand pressed against the center of his chest. No blood showed. No wound opened. Yet every step seemed to drag through him as though his body had been split between the stair and the lantern in Evara's hand. For 7 years, Evara had seen him from a distance, crossing upper halls with counselors around him, standing beneath war banners with his expression cut from volcanic stone, passing through the lantern courts without once looking long enough to remember the girl who had fallen beside his bed. Now he looked at her, not past her, at her. His gaze dropped to her chained wrist, then to the ledger, then to the unnumbered lantern beating beneath her palm. The air between them tightened with something too dangerous to name, as longing and too intimate to dismiss as evidence. Evara felt her own borrowed ember answer his presence. Not sweetly, not romantically, but painfully, like flesh remembering a wound before it healed wrong. Kaedric took one step toward her. Vosrin moved into his path. It was the bravest thing a frightened man had ever done for a lie. Your Majesty, he said, bowing low enough to flatter, not low enough to yield. The convicted flame thief has touched an unnumbered archive object during punishment count. Any response from the object must be considered contaminated by criminal contact. Kaedric's eyes did not leave Evara. Her chain is cutting her wrist. No hand has harmed her beyond sentence restraint. The king's jaw flexed. For a moment, the heat in the crypt changed. Not from the lantern. From him. Every black chain trembled as the dragon under his skin pushed against court-shaped bone. Evara saw the moment he almost chose rage. Then he stopped. His hand pressed harder to his chest. His voice came quiet enough to frighten the witnesses more than shouting would have. Loosen the chain. Do not remove it. The guard obeyed before Vosrin could speak. Relief cut through Evara's wrist and a sharp rush of blood returning. She did not thank Kaedric. Gratitude would have been another chain, and he knew it. Something like pain crossed his face when she remained silent. Good. Let him stand in a fraction of unanswered hurt. The lantern beat again. Thud. Kaedric flinched. Evara saw him fight to hide it. Saw him fail. The court witnesses saw too, and the old balance of power shifted by the width of one breath. A king could conceal weakness from rumor, not from a heart beating in a dead archive. Vossrin raised the white rod. Seal the active response. No, Evara said. The rod paused. She turned fully toward him, keeping one hand on the glass. You sealed it once. Not again. A murmur climbed the stair behind Kaedric, where nobles had gathered above the open door, afraid to descend but too hungry for scandal to leave. The Morath stair had become a throat between court and crypt. Every word below now traveled upward. Vossrin lowered his voice. Mind your position. My position was written by you. You were judged by court record. And court record stands here. She lifted the ledger with her chained hand. The black seal on its cover pulsed once faintly, as if the lantern had breathed across it. The first page turned by itself. No wind moved. No other lantern lit. Only the unnumbered one burned clearer. And the ledger answered with the reluctance of a grave being asked to give back a name. Letters rose through the page. Not ink. Not flame. Something between both dark gold against black leather. The lesser scribe nearest Evara made a choking sound. Archive script. Vossrin spun toward him. Silence. But the word had already reached the stair. Archive script. The old law of Morath. Dead lanterns did not testify for grief, pity, romance, or royal command. They testified only for custody, what entered, who held it when it was sealed, and what name the court gave the act afterward. Kaedric's face changed as the first line formed. Royal Heartflame entered. His breath stopped. The second line burned beneath it. Recovery chamber emptied. Lady Soreth whispered no. The third line appeared. Unnumbered lanterns sealed. The lantern beat once. Thud. Then the fourth line formed slower than the rest, as if the archive itself understood the cruelty of what it had preserved. Servant theft charge prepared. No one moved. The court above went silent in a way no command had ever achieved. Evara stared at the words until they blurred. Not because she had not known. Some part of her had known for 7 years. The body knew when it was made into a hiding place. The heart knew when its sacrifice had been renamed as crime. But knowing alone had kept her alive only in secret. This was different. This was the dead archive saying it, where the court could hear. Vossrin recovered first. Lies were slower than truth, but practiced men learned to move them quickly. Dead lantern law cannot accuse royal recovery. Evara looked at him. The heat beneath her ribs sharpened not into power but into clarity. You did not find flame in my hands, she said. You moved it out of his chest and made my hands the crime. The words struck harder than accusation because they carried no ornament. Kaedric turned on Vossrin. The arch-lanterner bowed again, but this time he misjudged the depth. Too low. Too quick. Fear had bent him before loyalty could dress it. Your Majesty, the woman seeks to reverse a lawful conviction by exploiting your present distress. My present distress, Kaedric said, is beating inside a lantern I was never told existed. The preservation of royal life required measures beyond public comprehension. Whose measures? Vossrin's fingers tightened on the rod until his knuckles looked carved from bone. The Recovery Council acted under emergency doctrine. Name them. The archive is corrupted. Name them. The convicted hand remains on the object. Kaedric took one step closer. The lantern pulsed. Evara's chest answered. The king stopped again, not from command, not from fear, but because he understood something at last. Every reckless move from him could be used to bury her a second time. The realization cost him. She saw it. He had built a reign on control. On never flinching before foreign courts. On never letting enemies see how the assassination had left his body imperfect. His sleep broken, his pulse wrong. Now the flaw he had hidden had become a witness against the court that healed him. If my heart flame was buried in a dead archive while I lived above it, he said, each word drawn through iron, then my recovery was built on a theft the court called healing. The sentence went up the stair and struck the nobles gathered there. Panic answered. Not grief for Evara. Not yet. Political fear. If the king's recovery had been false recorded, every oath sworn after it could be challenged. Every decree bearing the authority of his restored life could be stained. Every official who had praised the miracle of Morath's healing could become witness to a hidden crime. Vossrin knew it too. His gaze cut upward toward the listening court, and Evara saw the next danger arrive before anyone spoke it. He did not need to prove she had stolen flame. He only needed to make the truth too costly to accept. Vossrin lifted the white rod and touched its end to the ledger. The page began to frost at the edges. "By dead archive doctrine," he said, voice ringing. "Now, any record that endangers continuity of royal authority must be sealed until the High Court of Flame determines whether revelation serves the crown." The fourth line trembled. Servant theft charge prepared. Evara pressed her palm harder against the lantern. Pain shot through her ribs as the heartbeat inside the glass struck against the buried flame in her body. Kaedric moved, but she raised her chained hand before he could take another step. Not to stop him for Vossrin. To stop him for the record. If the king touched the ledger now, they would call it royal interference. If he burned the rod, they would call it panic. If he broke Vossrin's hand, they would call the archive conquered instead of awakened. Evara had been silent for 7 years because no one would hear her. Now the dead had begun to answer. She would not let a king's anger speak over them. "Read the line again," she said. The scribe on the floor stared at her. What Evara did not look away from Vossrin. "Read the line before he freezes it." Vossrin's rod brightened. The frost crawled inward. The scribe looked at Kaedric. Kaedric's voice was barely more than breath. "Read." The scribe swallowed, then spoke into the crypt and up the stair. Royal Heartflame entered. Recovery chamber emptied. Unnumbered lantern sealed. Servant theft charge prepared. The words struck the archive a second time. The unnumbered lantern flared. Not outward. Inward. Its clear glass filled with a deeper gold, and behind the heart-shaped ember another shadow appeared for half a breath. A pulse within the pulse. Smaller. Darker. Not Kaedric's rhythm. Not Evara's answering pain. Someone else's final heartbeat had been sealed inside the record. Vossrin saw it. For the first time his face showed something beyond fear. Recognition. Then he slammed the white rod against the ledger. The page went black. The lantern's glow narrowed to one hard burning point. And before the court could understand that a second pulse had appeared inside the king's missing heart flame, the Morath Lantern Crypt spoke through every chain in a low iron voice. Evara had not stolen royal heart flame. The Morath Lantern Crypt remembered royal heart flame entered recovery chamber, emptied unnumbered lantern, sealed and servant theft charge prepared, before Kaedric woke alive above the court that buried the missing half of his heart. The spilled ink froze before it touched the ash. Evara saw it first. A black bead hung in the air between the fallen scribe's hand and the crypt floor, shivering as if Morath itself had refused to let another record fall where Vossrin wanted it. The page in the ledger had gone dark beneath his white rod, but the words had already been spoken twice. In Morath, a spoken custody line did not vanish because a frightened official struck leather. Kaedric stood 3 steps away, one hand pressed to his chest. He did not come closer. That restraint cut deeper than rescue would have. Evara could feel the violence he was holding back in the heat under the stones, in the trembling chains above them, in the way the Dragon King's shadow kept swelling against the crypt wall and forcing itself smaller again. He was not saving her by force. Not yet. He was doing something harder for a man born to command fire. He was letting the record speak first. "No one touches the ledger again," Kaedric said. Vossrin's white rod remained against the blackened page. "Your Majesty, the archive has shown a second pulse. That changes the matter." "Yes," Evara said. "It does." His gaze snapped to her. She kept one palm against the clear lantern and lifted her chained wrist with the other, letting every witness see where iron had eaten into her skin. "The second pulse appeared before you sealed the page. Not after. Do not call it corruption because you failed to bury it quickly enough." A murmur moved up the stair. Vossrin turned just enough to give the listening nobles his composed profile. "The convicted woman speaks cleverly because she has had 7 years to shape a defense." "No," Evara said. "I had 7 years to learn which men fear a page before they fear a wound." Kaedric's eyes went to Vossrin's hand. The arch-lanterner lowered the rod from the ledger, but too late. A thin gold line had climbed from the blackened page onto the ivory surface. Not flame. Not ornament. A custody mark. Morath had touched the tool that tried to silence it. Vosrin saw the line and closed his fingers over it. Evara saw that too. "Open your hand," she said. Lady Soreth gave a strained laugh from the stair. "She forgets herself." No, Kaedric said without taking his eyes from Vosrin. "She remembers where the record moved." Vosrin bowed his head. "A punished thief cannot command an arch-lanterner." "She did not command your office," Kaedric said. "She answered the archive." The words settled between them. Not pardon, not trust, but recognition sharp enough to cut the old lie open. Vosrin's face hardened. "Then let the archive test her." He lifted the white rod toward Evara's chest. Kaedric moved half a step. The lantern beat hard. Evara raised her free hand before he could cross the distance. "No." Kaedric stopped. The entire crypt seemed to stop with him. Evara looked at the rod. "You want to test the body you accused. Test the sealing hand first." Vosrin's eyes narrowed. "Morath does not answer servant demands." "Then let it answer custody order." Her voice was dry but steady. "The lantern has shown what entered. The ledger has shown what was prepared." The rod touched the page and took the mark. "Read what hand sealed the unnumbered lantern." Kaedric turned fully toward the ledger. "Can Morath do that?" No one answered. Because everyone knew the answer might ruin them. Evara pressed her palm flatter to the glass. Heat moved through her fingers, old and intimate, not desire, not destiny, but debt. Dead lanterns remember custody. The unnumbered lantern beat once. Thud. The gold line beneath Vosrin's fingers brightened. He tried to slide the rod behind his sleeve. Kaedric's voice cut through the motion. "Show your hand." Vosrin did not move. The king's face went still. Not soft. Not pleading. The Dragon King returned in that stillness, all black fire restrained behind human bone. "Arch-Lanterner Hale, show your hand before I decide refusal is testimony." Slowly, Vosrin opened his fist. The custody mark had burned across his palm. 3 narrow bars crossed by a hooked crescent. The lesser scribe made a small broken sound. Kaedric looked at him. "Speak." The scribe's face had gone gray. "That is not a general lantern seal." Vosrin snapped, "Enough." The scribe flinched. Kaedric did not. "Speak." "It is a recovery seal," the scribe whispered. "Used only when living flame is transferred under emergency authority." Evara's knees nearly weakened. Not because she was surprised. Because the lie had finally been forced to wear its proper shape. Kaedric looked from the mark on Vosrin's palm to the lantern, then to Evara. Something broke across his expression and vanished before the court above could name it. He understood now. Her punishment had not followed a theft. The theft charge had followed the transfer. Vosrin struck before grief could become law. "Emergency authority saved your life," he said to the king. "Will you condemn the hands that kept your throne breathing?" Kaedric's answer came low. "I will condemn any hand that kept me breathing by burying the woman who carried the cost." The crypt warmed. Only a little. Enough for the frozen ink bead to fall. It struck the ash and spread into letters. Not on the ledger. On the floor, between Evara and Vosrin. Second pulse retained. Then the ash dragged itself into a colder record. Recovery seal entered. Sealing hand marked. Second pulse retained. Lanterner title concealed. Vosrin went rigid. The lantern's glow tightened around its hidden shadow, and for one terrible breath, Evara heard another rhythm under Kaedric's heart flame. Smaller, darker, familiar to Morath, though not to her. Kaedric heard it too. His hand left his chest. "Whose pulse?" he asked. The ash letters dragged themselves into a new line. Vosrin lifted the rod as if he could still strike the floor before the dead finished speaking. Evara stepped on the rod's shadow. Not touching him. Not touching the weapon. Only placing herself between silence and record. The final word formed. Not a name, a title. Lanterner. But Morath had not yet spoken which lanterner died inside the king's missing heart flame. The crypt had named the second pulse as Lanterner, but not the dead keeper whose heartbeat had been sealed inside Kaedric's missing flame. That silence was worse than a name. A name could be attacked. It could be stained, questioned, weighed against rank buried beneath court doctrine until the living grew tired of defending the dead. But silence meant something colder. Someone had removed the dead so cleanly that even Morath had to reach through layers of law before it could remember the shape of him. Evara kept one hand on the clear lantern. The heat no longer spread through her palm. It gathered there, held tight behind the glass. Each beat struck inward deeper into the gold chambers around the ember where the second pulse waited beneath Kaedric's heart flame like a witness sealed behind a king's survival. "Read the lanterner's name," Evara said. Vossrin looked at her as if she had stepped beyond punishment into insult. Dead office records cannot be tried through a convicted thief's grief. "There is no grief in that lantern," Evara said. "Only custody." The words steadied her more than comfort would have. She was still chained, still convicted, still standing in ash while nobles watched from the stair above their faces, pale with the delicious horror of people seeing a scandal before they understood it might require them to answer for silence. No pardon had been spoken. No apology had crossed Kaedric's mouth. No law had returned her name to the living court. But Morath was answering. And for the first time in 7 years, the court could not make her pain the only evidence in the room. Vossrin lifted his white rod again, but the custody mark across his palm brightened before the rod rose fully. The 3 bars and hooked crescent burned beneath his skin, not enough to wound, only enough to refuse concealment. The rod trembled once. Kaedric saw it. "Do not seal what you are afraid to hear," he said. Vossrin bowed without lowering the rod. "I am preserving crown stability." "No," Evara said. "You are preserving the gap where a dead man's name should be." The unnumbered lantern beat once. Thud. Ash rose from the floor in a thin ring around her feet. It did not protect her. It did not crown her. It simply marked the place where her touch the lantern and the spoken record had met. Morath did not love. Morath did not pity. Morath kept what had been entrusted to it, even when the living called that trust death. The ledger opened again. Not to the blackened page. To a thinner sheet near the back, one Evara had not seen before. The leather around it cracked like old skin. 4 lines formed slowly, as if each had been dragged out of a sealed throat. Lanterner witness entered. Final heartbeat retained. Death name removed. Royal recovery stabilized. The court above inhaled as one body. Kaedric did not. He had gone utterly still. Evara looked at him and saw the blow land not on the king but on the man who had survived without knowing what his survival had consumed. His fingers opened against his chest. For years that chest had carried an uneven silence. Now that silence had a record. A lanterner had entered the recovery chamber. A final heartbeat had been retained. A death name had been removed. And the Dragon King had risen alive. "If a lanterner died inside my recovery," Kaedric said, his voice stripped of ceremony, "then my life was not only built on Evara's conviction, it was stabilized by a death my court erased." No one above answered him. Vossrin did. "Your Majesty, many servants died that night. Assassination creates confusion. Emergency doctrine permits incomplete naming when the crown's life is at risk." Evara turned toward him. "Incomplete naming." His expression hardened. She stepped closer to the ledger, dragging the chain with her. Iron scraped over ash loud in the silence. "You did not leave the name incomplete. You removed it." The mark in Vossrin's palm flared. That was enough. Evara saw Kaedric see it too. The Dragon King did not seize him. He did not burn the rod out of his hand. He did not tear Morath open to prove a rage the court would happily rename instability. He only looked to the lesser scribe still kneeling near the spilled ink. "Can a death name be removed without a sealing hand?" Kaedric asked. The scribe swallowed. "No, Your Majesty." "Can Morath read the removal hand?" Vossrin snapped. "Not through her." Evara answered before the scribe could. "Then not through me." She lifted her hand from the lantern. The loss of heat nearly took her breath. For one terrible moment, the old cold under her ribs opened again, vast and familiar, the place where Kaedric's leaving flame had lived inside her for 7 years without thanks, without witness, without mercy. Her knees almost bent. Kaedric moved. Then stopped himself. His restraint shook through the chains harder than anger had. Evara placed her palm flat on the ledger instead. "Not the lantern. The record." "I am not asking as the body that carried flame," she said. "I am asking as the convicted name written inside this sentence." If my charge was prepared after the death name was removed, then let Morath read the hand that made my crime possible. The ledger did not flare. It bled ash. A thin gray line crawled across the page and split it into two columns. One held Evara's sentence. Evara Lune. Flame thief. Buried service. The other remained empty. Vosrin took one step back. Kaedric's gaze sharpened. Why is there an empty column? The lesser scribe's voice trembled. For paired custody, your majesty. A crime cannot be prepared without the office that prepared it. The empty column darkened. Vosrin raised the rod. This time Kaedric moved only his voice. Touch that page and refusal becomes testimony. Vosrin froze. The empty column began to write. Not a full name. Not yet. Only an office mark. Arc Lantona. The court above erupted into frightened whispers. Vosrin's face did not change quickly enough to hide the truth. For half a breath, triumph and terror crossed together. Not guilt confessed. Calculation exposed. Evara understood then. The dead lanterner had not been a nameless assistant. Someone with authority had witnessed the transfer. Someone had died with Kaedric's missing flame, and after that death, the office itself had prepared her charge. The ledger wrote one final line beneath the title. Death name removed by succeeding hand. Every witness on the stair turned toward Vosrin Hale. He did not confess. He smiled. A small, cold, ruined smile. Then let the court decide, he said, whether the crown would rather have a living king or a named dead lanterner. The cruelty of it passed through Morath like a blade through silk. That had always been his defense. Not innocence. Necessity. He would not deny the record. If denial became impossible, he would make truth sound like treason. He would make Evara's vindication look like a threat to Kaedric's reign. He would force the court to choose between a woman they had already buried and the king whose survival gave their laws meaning. The nobles above began to murmur in exactly the way he wanted. The recovery saved the realm. If the king's life required silence, one servant cannot outweigh the throne. Evara listened without lowering her head. There it was, the old shape of the crime. Not that they did not believe a woman had carried the cost. They simply believed the cost belonged to them once it served the crown. Kaedric heard them too. Something changed in his face. Not anger this time. Recognition sharpened by shame. For 7 years he had accepted a body that continued living and called it recovery. He had never asked what had been burned to make that life possible. He had never asked why a servant's conviction sat so neatly beneath his miracle. Now the answer stood before him with ash on her hem and a chain around her wrist, and the court was already trying to weigh her against his throne. He turned toward the stair. The whispers died. No life taken into my keeping becomes expendable because my crown benefited from it, he said. Vosrin's smile thinned. A noble sentiment, your majesty. But sentiment cannot undo recovery doctrine. No, Kaedric said, but witness can. He looked back at Evara, not pleading, not commanding, not asking her to save him from the truth. Waiting. The choice settled in her hands. She could step back. She could let the court argue over doctrine until the record cooled. She could let them turn the dead lanterner into policy, and her own body into unfortunate necessity. She could survive, perhaps, with a half-pardon in a quiet room somewhere far from the crypt. That would be another burial. Evara pressed her palm harder to the ledger. Morath, she said. And the name of the crypt tasted like iron. If the dead name was removed, read where it was placed. Vosrin's rod struck the floor. The white light burst outward cold and hard. For one breath, every lantern in the crypt went darker, though none had been lit. The unnumbered lantern's heart flame compressed to a single gold point. Kaedric staggered, his hand flying back to his chest, but he did not touch the ledger. He did not touch Evara. He only caught himself against the stone and forced out one command. Hold witness. The lesser scribe repeated it before fear could stop him. Hold witness. Lady Soreth whispered it next, unwilling but trapped by court procedure. Hold witness. Then the guards on the stair. Then the nobles above. Hold witness. The phrase did what fire could not. It pinned the moment into law. Vosrin's white flare cracked. The ledger drank the light. Ash spun upward from the page, not into letters this time, but into a shape a man's hand burned at the knuckles, wearing a narrow lanterner's ring with one side broken away. The image hovered above the ledger, trembling between memory and accusation. Evara's breath caught. The broken half of that ring was familiar. She had seen it before. Not in Morath. Not in the recovery chamber. On Vosrin's chain of office. The arch-lanterner saw her look. His hand moved to his collar before he could stop himself. Kaedric's gaze followed. The court above saw too. Vosrin's smile vanished. The unnumbered lantern beat so hard the clear glass cracked from crown to base. And from inside the split a dead man's voice drew one breath. The dead man's voice did not speak at first. It breathed. One thin draw of air came from the cracked lantern dry, as ash pulled through a throat that had not opened in 7 years. Every witness on the stair leaned toward it despite fear. Even Vosrin Hale went still, his hand locked around the chain at his collar where the broken half-ring lay hidden beneath his robes. Evara did not move. She understood by then that Morath gave truth like a wound reopened with care. Not all at once. Not kindly. Only in the order custody allowed. The lantern beat once around Kaedric's missing flame, then the second pulse answered beneath it. A voice scraped through the cracked glass. Not theft. The words were faint, but the crypt carried them upward with cruel precision. Not theft. The court above stirred as if the phrase had struck flesh. Vosrin recovered before anyone else. A death echo. Nothing more. Kaedric looked at him. Death echoes do not answer custody records. They do when a convicted thief has awakened unstable flame beneath royal pressure. Evara turned her head. Still calling me thief, Vosrin's eyes held hers. Until judgment reverses the sentence, you remain what the court named you. That was the shape of him. Not denial. Procedure sharpened into cruelty. He would stand over a living heart, a dead witness, a marked palm, a broken ring, and still hide behind the sentence he had helped create. Evara lifted her chained wrist. Then let the sentence stand beside the office that made it. The ledger answered before Vosrin could. The 2 columns on the open page deepened. Evara's conviction remained on one side, black and hard. Evara Lune. Flame thief. Buried service. The empty column beside it widened. Arch-lanterner. Death name removed by succeeding hand. The dead voice breathed again. Ring. Evara's gaze went to Vosrin's collar. So did Kaedric's. Vosrin's fingers tightened over the chain. Royal office insignia is not subject to inspection through crypt disturbance. No, Evara said. But paired custody is. The lesser scribe looked up sharply. Vosrin's face chilled. Do not help her. She does not need help, Kaedric said. She is following the record. That struck Evara harder than praise would have. Not because it was enough. It was not. Not after 7 years. Not after hunger exile beneath the court hands, searched like shame, a name made poisonous in every chamber she passed. But for the first time, Kaedric Mor had said what she was doing without making it madness, insolence, or grief. She did not let herself soften. Softness could come later if he earned a place near it. Morath, she said, pressing her palm against the ledger if the death name was removed by succeeding hand. Compare the broken custody ring. Vosrin raised the white rod. Kaedric did not touch him. He only spoke. Present the chain. The arch-lanterner bowed. Your Majesty, if you compel sacred office exposure in response to a convicted woman's demand, the court may rule the record politically coerced. Then I will not compel exposure, Kaedric said. Vosrin's shoulders eased by a fraction. Kaedric's next words ended that relief. I will ask Morath whether refusal completes the paired custody. The crypt went cold. The lantern chains gave a single metallic shiver. Vosrin understood too late. Refusal was safer in court than in Morath. Above refusal could be dressed as dignity. Below refusal entered the record as an act. The ledger wrote beneath arch-lanterner. Office chain withheld. Vosrin ripped the chain from under his collar. The broken half-ring swung free. It was small, blackened at the edge, and old enough that the engraved letters along its inner curve had nearly worn flat. The missing half had been snapped away, not melted. Evara could see the violence of the break. Jagged silver. Burned hinge. A ring made to be shared in office, split by force, and hidden as inheritance. The cracked lantern brightened. Not all the lanterns. Only the unnumbered one. Gold gathered in its broken seam, and for an instant the missing half of the ring appeared inside the glass wrapped around the second pulse like a dead man's last restraint. The ledger wrote, "Custody ring divided. Senior witness retained. Succeeding hand claimed office. Name carried on broken half." Vosrin's breathing changed. Not enough for the court to call guilt. Enough for Evara. She looked at the ring on his chain. "The name is on the half you kept." "No," he said. Too fast. Kaedric heard it. The Dragon King's face did not change, but the heat in the crypt sharpened until the ash at his feet curled. "Read the ring." Vosrin's smile returned colder now because he had been forced into open danger. Gladly. He lifted the broken half-ring for the court to see. The inner curve was blank. A murmur moved above. Lady Soreth exhaled in relief. There. The servant overreaches. Vosrin turned the blank silver slowly. The archive has produced symbols, echoes, and emotional theatrics. But no name. No named dead. No admissible charge. Only a convicted flame thief leading his majesty through grief. Evara stared at the blank ring. For one breath, the old familiar thing rose inside her. Doubt. Not doubt of truth. Doubt of survival. How many times had she seen this, the evidence nearly speaking, then failing at the edge where power had already scraped the name away? The court would remember the blank ring more than the lines before it. They would say Morath trembled, yes. They would say something irregular happened, yes. But irregular was not innocence. Irregular was where powerful men hid verdicts. Her hand tightened on the ledger until the cracked leather bit her palm. Then she remembered the voice. Ring. Not chain. Not office. Ring. She looked at the half-ring inside the lantern wrapped around the second pulse. The name was not kept on the outside half, she said. Vosrin's expression did not move. That was answer enough. Evara lifted her eyes to Kaedric. The dead man carried the named half into your recovery. Vosrin kept the blank half because blank authority could inherit. The name is inside the flame he sealed. The second pulse struck the glass. Thud. Kaedric closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was no softness in him. Only horror made disciplined. Can the lantern read what is inside the retained pulse? The lesser scribe whispered. If the living custody permits it. All eyes turned to Evara. Not because she owned the flame, because she had carried its missing half. She felt the trap and the truth together. If she refused, Vosrin would call the record incomplete. If she consented, the court would have another excuse to use her body as instrument. The old crime had begun exactly there, with royal life passing through her, without permission being asked afterward. Kaedric seemed to understand at the same moment. His voice changed. Evara. She looked at him. Not queen, not mate, not savior. Her name, spoken without the stain they had put on it. You do not have to give them your body again, he said. The court above went silent. Vosrin seized on it. Then the record ends. Evara looked at the unnumbered lantern. Its cracked glass pulsed around the heart flame she had once caught before death could take it. For 7 years that flame had lived in her cold. Not as romance. Not as fate. As cost. She had not chosen the crime, but she could choose the witness. I will not give them my body, she said. Vosrin's smile sharpened. Evara placed her chained wrist over the ledger and let the iron bite the old bruise open. A single drop of blood fell on her sentence. I give Morath the conviction they wrote on me. The ledger drank the blood. The unnumbered lantern flared inward. Inside the cracked glass, the ring around the second pulse turned. Letters burned along its inner curve, not bright but black, as if the name had been branded by absence. The dead voice drew another breath. This time it spoke clearly. Orin Hale. Vosrin's face emptied. Kaedric looked at him. Hale. The court above recoiled at the shared name. Vosrin did not confess. He did something more dangerous. He bowed. Orin Hale was my predecessor, he said, and the man who betrayed the recovery chamber to the assassins. The dead pulse struck once violent enough to split another line through the lantern glass. The ledger wrote beneath the name. Orrin Hale entered as witness. Orrin Hale died before accusation. Orrin Hale's name removed. Then the page paused. The ash on the floor began to circle Evara's feet again. Kaedric's voice was low. Read the next line. Vosrin lifted his rod with both hands, no longer pretending calm. If the next line names treason, your majesty, your recovery becomes the fruit of a traitor's final act. Evara looked at the cracked lantern. The dead man inside Kaedric's missing heart flame drew one last breath. And Morath began to write, who had opened the royal recovery chamber before the assassination blade arrived. The first line did not name an assassin, it named a key. Recovery chamber opened by white custody rod. The words burned across the ledger with a slow, merciless calm. Vosrin's rod trembled in his hand. Every eye in Morath went to it. He did not lower the rod. A lesser man might have hidden the weapon. Vosrin held it higher, as if confidence could turn evidence into ceremony. Every arch-lanterner carries a white custody rod. The line proves office access, not guilt. Evara looked at the mark still burning across his palm, then let Morath read which office hand carried it. Vosrin's mouth thinned. The convicted flame thief continues to lead the king toward a record she does not understand. No, Kaedric said. She is asking the question everyone else is afraid to form. The lantern beat once. Thud. Inside the cracked glass, Orrin Hale's second pulse shuddered beneath the king's missing heart flame. The dead man's voice had gone silent, but silence no longer meant absence. Morath had found him, and once found the dead had weight. The ledger wrote again. White rod admitted. Inner flame seal lowered. Assassin blade followed. A sound moved through the stair above, half gasp, half denial. Kaedric did not speak. The line had struck too close. For 7 years, the court had told the story one way: assassins broke the procession, the king was carried to recovery, miracle flame restored him, and a servant stole what she should never have touched. Now Morath was changing the order. The chamber had opened before the blade finished its work. The inner seal had lowered. The attack had not merely reached the king. It had been allowed into the place where he should have been saved. Vosrin's voice sharpened. Orrin Hale held the office then. If Morath names White Rod access, it names him. The cracked lantern flared. Not outward. Inward around the ring holding Orrin's pulse. The dead voice scraped through the glass. No. One word. Enough. Evara felt it pass through her ribs. Not as pain this time, but as alignment. The record, the lantern, the dead pulse. Her own false sentence, each piece had begun to turn toward the same hidden center. Vosrin lifted the rod toward the cracked glass. Death echoes may refuse shame. Shame remains. Evara stepped before the lantern. Kaedric moved at the same instant. This time she did not stop him with her hand. She stopped him with his own lesson. Witness first, she said. He halted so abruptly the chains overhead rang. For one breath they looked at each other across ash and heat. No softness. No forgiveness. Something more dangerous, understanding under restraint. Kaedric turned his fury back into law. No instrument touches the unnumbered lantern while it holds active custody. Vosrin bowed. By whose authority? By the authority of the man whose heart is inside it. The crypt went still. Even Vosrin had no doctrine ready for that. Evara did not let the silence swell. Morath read the hand that lowered the inner seal. The ledger answered with ash, not flame. A gray image rose from the page, 2 hands over a chamber lock. One older burned across the knuckles, wearing the broken named half of Orrin's ring. The other younger gloved in white, holding the custody rod from beneath, not above, guiding it. Vosrin's face hardened before the image fully formed. He knew what was coming. Evara did too. The younger hand twisted first. The older hand tried to pull the rod back. Then black fire burst through the memory, swallowing the image before it could show the face. Vosrin had struck the floor with the rod. Not the ledger. Not the lantern. The floor. The ash record shattered outward. Several nobles cried out above. The lesser scribe fell back against the stair. Lady Soreth covered her mouth with both hands. Kaedric's voice dropped into something almost inhuman. You were told not to touch active custody. I touched ash, Vosrin said. His breathing was quick now, but his words stayed clean. Morath floor memory is not protected under lantern custody, unless named by court order. Evara looked at the scattered ash. There it was again, law used like a blade slipped between ribs. He did not have to defeat the truth, only divide it into forms too small to stand together. She knelt. The chain pulled at her wrist. Kaedric's gaze snapped to the guard holding it. The guard released slack before the king spoke. Evara gathered a pinch of broken ash between her fingers. It was cold then, hot then cold again. The memory had not vanished. It had been broken. So she changed the question. Not who held the rod. Why? Morath. She said if the inner seal was lowered before the blade followed, read what order required the seal lowered. Vossrin went very still. Kaedric heard the stillness. The ledger's black page turned without wind. A narrow strip of parchment slid from beneath Evara's sentence so thin, it had hidden between leather and binding for 7 years. It curled open in the ash at her knees. The writing on it was not Morath script. It was court command script. Evara recognized the shape because she had seen it once before the morning guards came for her. Same hard strokes, same official spacing, same arrogance of a page that believed itself already obeyed. The lesser scribe leaned forward, shaking. Emergency preparation order. Read it, Kaedric said. Vossrin's rod lowered toward the parchment. Kaedric did not move, but the air around him blackened with heat. Do not. The scribe swallowed and read. Upon anticipated royal death or compromised recovery, inner flame custody shall pass to succeeding lantern authority for preservation of crown continuity. Kaedric's eyes narrowed. Anticipated. The word cut deeper than accusation. Anticipated meant someone had prepared for his death before the court admitted he was dying. Anticipated meant succession had been waiting in the recovery chamber. Vossrin recovered the line before it could turn fully against him. Emergency doctrine must prepare for all outcomes. The Dragon Court cannot collapse because men are too sentimental to imagine a king's death. Evara rose slowly, the parchment in her hand. You did more than imagine it, she said. You prepared where his flame would go. Vossrin's stare sharpened. Careful. No. The word left her before fear could catch it. The lantern beat. Thud. Evara took one step toward him. For 7 years the court searched my sleeves, my room, my ashes, my skin. They asked where I hid royal flame. They never asked who wrote an order before the blade reached him. Kaedric's face changed. The blow had found another wound. He had asked about assassins, traitors, foreign blades, rebel houses. He had not asked why his own recovery chamber had been prepared to receive his death before he arrived. Whose signature, he said. The scribe looked at the order and went pale. Vossrin smiled again, small and controlled. Read it. That confidence was worse than fear. The scribe obeyed. Approved under Orenhale's senior arch-lanterner. The court above breathed relief too quickly. Vossrin turned that relief into a weapon. There is your dead, lanterner. My predecessor opened the way, prepared the theft, and died inside the recovery he betrayed. I removed his name to preserve the crown from scandal. I allowed this woman's sentence because stolen flame was found missing after his treason. Morath has not accused me. It has revealed why I acted. A clean story. A survivable story. One dead traitor. One convicted servant. One current official who had made hard choices after disaster. Evara stared at the signature. The letters were Orenhale's. That was the worst part. Then her eye caught the lower edge of the order where ash from the shattered floor memory had stuck to the parchment. There was a second impression beneath the ink. Not written. Pressed. A seal before a seal. She turned the parchment toward the lantern. Vossrin Lune. Kaedric stepped into his path. No flame. No blow. Only his body between Vossrin and Evara. You will not reach her. Vossrin stopped inches from the king. She is handling crown evidence while still convicted. And you are reaching for it before it is read. Evara held the parchment closer to the cracked lantern. The heart flame inside did not choose her. It did not bless her. It illuminated what had been there all along. Beneath Oren's signature, another mark appeared. 3 narrow bars crossed by a hooked crescent. The same mark burned into Vossrin's palm. but this one bore a line of text beneath it. Succeeding hand requested transfer before senior death confirmed. The stair above went silent. Vosrin's face emptied of all expression. Evara read the line aloud because she knew the court would pretend not to understand unless the words were forced into air. Succeeding hand requested transfer before senior death confirmed. Kaedric looked at Vosrin. You requested Orin's office before he was dead. Vosrin did not confess. He lifted his chin. I preserved continuity. The cracked lantern beat so hard the glass split wider. Orin Hale's dead voice came through the fracture, no longer faint. He opened the chamber. Vosrin struck the lantern. Not with flame, with the white rod. The cracked glass burst inward, and Kaedric fell to one knee as the missing half of his heart flame went dark in Evara's hands. The lantern went dark in Evara's hands. Not dim. Dark. One heartbeat vanished from the crypt, and the silence that followed was so sudden that every chain seemed to hang from a dead sky. Kaedric fell to one knee. The sound of his armor striking stone broke the court's frozen breath. Nobles cried out from the stair. A guard reached for his sword, and stopped unsure whether steel could defend a king from the absence inside his own chest. The lesser scribe dropped the emergency order. It fluttered into the ash between Evara and Vosrin, its hidden mark still glowing faintly beneath Orin Hale's forced signature. Evara could not move. The broken lantern glass had folded inward around the heart-shaped ember, not shattered outward. That mattered. Some part of her knew it mattered. Vosrin had not destroyed evidence like a man smashing a lamp. He had collapsed the custody chamber around the flame, forcing the light into itself until the record could no longer breathe. Kaedric's hand clawed once against the floor, then stilled. Vosrin turned first because guilt needed speed. The convicted thief extinguished royal heart flame, he said, voice ringing up the stair before anyone else could name the moment. Witnesses record this. Evara Lune touched the unnumbered lantern. The king's pulse failed. The royal flame went dark in her hands. The court seized on it like frightened animals finding a familiar trail. She killed him. The thief finished what she began. Take her away. The guard on Evara's chain jerked hard. Pain snapped through her wrist. She almost lost her grip on the ruined lantern, but the iron around her bones gave her something to answer. Pain was simple. Pain was present. Pain did not lie in elegant ink. No, she said. The word did not carry like Kaedric's commands. It did not need to. Morath heard it. The ash beneath the broken lantern stirred. Vosrin lifted the white rod again. Its tip was blackened where it had struck the glass. He held it away from his body now, as if distance could spare him from what the rod had done. You will be silent, he said. Evara looked at him over the dark lantern. You struck active custody. I stopped corrupted flame from destroying royal continuity. You struck it before Morath finished reading. I struck after you manipulated it. Evara's grip tightened. The glass edges bit her palm. Warmth did not come. Only a deep cold older than the crypt moved through the cracked chamber, where Kaedric's missing half had burned a moment before. Behind Vosrin, Kaedric struggled to rise. He failed. Not dramatically. Not like a king in a song. His body simply refused him. His breath came shallow, stripped of power. The sight cut through Evara with a sharpness she hated because pity was too small a word for what lived between her wound and his collapse. He had not saved her in time. He had believed the record once. But he was on his knees now because the life she had carried had been struck in front of him, and every noble above was already trying to make her the weapon. Kaedric lifted his head. His eyes found hers. Not command. Not request. Witness. Evara turned back to the ledger. Her blood from the opened bruise still marked her sentence. The letters had darkened around it as if the conviction itself had begun to rot. Morath, she said, read the impact. Vosrin's face sharpened. There is no such procedure. The lesser scribe, pale as old wax, whispered, there is. Vosrin's rod snapped toward him. The scribe flinched but did not take the words back. Kaedric's voice came low from the floor. Say it. The scribe swallowed. When a custody vessel is struck during active witness, Morath may record impact sequence. Vosrin said, only if the vessel remains lit. Evara looked down at the dead lantern. No flame answered. For the first time since touching the unnumbered glass, fear found a clean path into her. If the light stayed dark, Vosrin would win the shape of the story. He did not need the truth gone, only silent long enough for the court to name it death by her hand. Then the broken lantern gave one soft sound. Not a heartbeat. A scrape. Inside the collapsed glass, something moved against ash. Evara lowered her face closer. Through the cracks, she saw a thin gold thread trapped beneath the inward-folded chamber, pinned under a shard blackened by Vosrin's rod. Not dead. Buried again. Evara understood. Her hands stopped shaking. You did not extinguish it, she said. You folded the record over it. Vosrin moved toward her. Kaedric forced one hand against the stone. No one touches her. The words were weak. The crypt obeyed them like iron. The guards froze. The nobles froze. Even Vosrin paused, because a failing king's order given inside a heartflame archive had more weight than a healthy king's rage above marble. Evara set the broken lantern carefully on the open ledger. Not in her hands. On the record. Vosrin's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? What you always feared, she said. Separating my body from the proof. She slid her bleeding wrist above the page, but did not touch the glass again. Morath. I am not carrying it. I am not returning it. I am not hiding it. I placed the struck custody vessel on the sentence used to bury me. Read what happened. For one breath, nothing answered. Then the gold thread inside the broken lantern pulsed. Small. Trapped. Alive. Kaedric gasped, as if a hook had caught inside his chest. Ash rose from the ledger in thin spirals. It circled the lantern, crossed Evara's sentence, and climbed toward the blackened tip of Vosrin's rod. Words formed across the page. Active heart flame present. White custody rod struck. Vessel collapsed inward. Royal pulse severed by impact. The stair above fell silent. Vosrin's face lost color. Evara did not let him recover. Read the hand holding the rod. The words appeared before he could speak. Rod held by succeeding arch-lanterner. Vosrin hail. No confession. No speech. No ornament. Just the name. At last. The court above recoiled from it. Not with justice yet. With terror. A named accusation against an office was no longer scandal. It was a fracture under the throne. Vosrin's expression changed into something clean and terrible. He had spent years inside law. He knew when one defense had died, so he reached for another. Yes, he said. The single word struck like a door closing. Evara went still. Kaedric's head lifted. Vosrin spread his marked hand so every witness could see the custody burn. Yes. I struck the vessel. I did what His Majesty could not do. I stopped an unstable, unauthorized heart flame from dragging the Dragon King into a dead man's echo and a thief's claim. If the impact severed a pulse, it severed corruption. Lady Soreth whispered, he admits the strike. He justifies it, the lesser scribe said almost inaudibly. Vosrin heard him and smiled without warmth. I justify preservation. If this woman had been allowed to continue, she would have bound the king's heart to Morath's dead and broken royal authority beyond repair. Evara looked at Kaedric. His breathing was worse. The gold thread inside the lantern pulsed again, thinner now. Whatever Vosrin had done, it had not killed the flame, but it had cut its path back to the king. The missing half of Kaedric's heart was alive inside a collapsed custody vessel, unable to beat freely, while his body knelt 3 steps away and lost strength with every breath. The court waited, not for truth, for which danger would cost less. Evara hated them for that. Then she hated herself for how well she understood them. 7 years had taught her the court did not always need to believe a lie. It only needed to prefer it. Vosrin turned to the nobles above. If the king dies now, his death lies with the convicted thief who awakened forbidden custody. If the vessel is sealed, his authority may yet be preserved through succession doctrine. Kaedric's voice scraped from the floor. I am not dead. Not yet, Your Majesty, Vosrin said gently. The gentleness was obscene. Evara placed both hands on the ledger. The broken glass cut into one palm. The iron chain cut the other wrist. 2 pains. 2 records. Her body wanted to bend around them, but she kept her spine straight. No more hidden carrying, she said. Vothran's eyes flicked to her. She repeated it louder. No more hidden carrying. Not in my body. Not in a dead lantern. Not in a sentence written by the office that needed me guilty. The unnumbered lantern pulsed. Kaedric's breath caught. Evara looked at him, and the heat between them was not romance. It was debt standing naked. It was the awful intimacy of survival built through another person's suffering. It was a king seeing too late the woman turned into the vault beneath his heartbeat. If the flame returns, she said, it returns through witness. Kaedric understood before anyone else did. His face tightened with pain. Evara. No. Her voice broke, then steadied. You do not get to spare me from the record now. That would only make another secret. He closed his mouth. She turned to the scribe. Write what I say. The scribe crawled toward the fallen ink hands, shaking. Vothran lifted the rod. This is unlawful. Kaedric's voice came like stone dragged over flame. Write. The scribe wrote. Evara spoke slowly, each word chosen, so the court could not bend it later. Evara Lune does not return royal heartflame as confession, surrender, bond, or pardon. Evara Lune permits witnessed passage of the severed royal pulse from collapsed custody vessel to living king under Morath record, pending full reading of false conviction, removed death name, and unlawful strike. The scribe's pen shook so hard the letters nearly blurred. The ledger corrected them. Each word burned clean. Vothran stared at the page. For the first time, he looked afraid not of what Morath had remembered, but of what Evara had learned to do with it. She had turned help into condition. She had turned sacrifice into record. She had refused to be used silently. The broken lantern beat once. Gold light slid from the collapsed glass not toward Evara's chest, but across the ledger lines she had spoken. It traveled over her name. Over flame thief. Over buried service. The false sentence smoked but did not vanish. Not yet. Then the light reached the edge of the page and stretched toward Kaedric. He remained on one knee. He did not reach for it. Evara understood why. If he seized it, Vothran would call it royal taking. If she pushed it, they would call it confession. The flame had to travel through the witnessed passage she had named. Read it back, she told the scribe. He did. His voice trembled through every word. As the final phrase left his mouth, the gold thread leapt from the ledger into Kaedric's chest. The king arched, once silent, terrible, both hands striking the stone. The crypt shook. The flame did not restore him fully. Evara saw that at once. His breath deepened, but the rhythm remained broken. The missing half had not returned whole. Vothran's strike had left damage in the passage. Kaedric lifted his head. For one moment his eyes burned gold. Then the ledger wrote a new line beneath Evara's dictated witness. Partial passage accepted. Royal pulse stabilized. Damage retained by unlawful strike. Vothran backed away. The custody mark on his palm split open, not bleeding but shedding pale ash. The ledger wrote again. Strike debt pending. Kaedric rose slowly. Not strong. Not healed. Alive by witness. Not by silence. He looked at Evara, and whatever lived in his face then was too raw for a court to own. You saved me once without record, he said. Evara held his gaze. Never again. The words hurt him. Good. Let truth hurt before it healed. Above the stair, the nobles had no language ready. Their miracle had become evidence. Their thief had become the condition under which the king still breathed. Their arch-lanterner had been named by the impact record, yet still stood with office power in his hand. Vothran saw the hesitation. He used it. He raised the white rod high, though its tip was cracked and blackened. Then, let the High Court of Flame judge whether a convicted woman may dictate terms to royal life. The stair torches went blue. Not from Morath. From above. Answering rods. More lanterners had gathered at the upper door. Their white lights filled the stair like winter knives. Vothran's smile returned thin and victorious. Morath has spoken enough for tonight. Evara looked past him to the line of lanterners blocking the stair. Kaedric turned one hand still pressed to his damaged chest. The unnumbered lantern lay broken on the ledger between them, its gold thread faint but alive. Then every white rod above struck the stone at once. And the Morath Lantern Crypt began to seal with Evara still inside it. The seal came down with Evara still inside Morath. It did not slam. It narrowed. Blue-white fire slid from the stairmouth into the crypt stones, drawing a burning line between Evara and the court above. Kaedric stood on the other side of it with one hand pressed against his damaged chest. His face pale beneath the ember iron crown, his breath still uneven from the broken passage of heart flame. He could have crossed by force. Everyone knew it. The heat gathering under his skin bent the blue fire away from him in small, frightened waves. But Evara shook her head once. Do not give him the excuse. Kaedric stopped. The look in his eyes changed, and she knew he understood. If he broke the seal by command, Vosrin would call every record corrupted by royal interference. If he dragged her out by strength, the court would say the Dragon King had been compromised by the woman accused of touching his heart flame. Rescue could become another lie if it arrived before witness finished speaking. Vosrin Hale stood on the stair above the line of fire, blackened white rod in one hand, marked palm half hidden in his sleeve. The convicted flame thief remains below until Morath is secured. Evara looked at the broken, unnumbered lantern lying on the open ledger. Its glass had folded inward where Vosrin had struck it. A faint gold thread still moved inside, trapped under ash and cracked crystal. Kaedric's missing pulse was not dead. It was damaged. Held. Waiting. Beside it, Hale's restored name burned in the ledger with the stubborn dignity of a dead man who had finally been heard. Vosrin lifted his voice for the nobles crowded above. You have seen what her touch has done. The king fell. The royal pulse fractured. A dead lanterner's echo rose from forbidden custody. This is no longer evidence. It is danger. The court murmured because danger was easier to accept than guilt. Evara did not answer him. She lowered herself to her knees beside the ledger. The chain around her wrist scraped across the ash. One end still hung from the iron cuff. The other had been dropped by the guard when the seal came down, leaving the restraint inside Morath with her. That mistake had weight. In a custody archive, every object sealed with a record became part of the record. She placed the broken lantern directly on top of her sentence. Evara Lune, flame thief, buried, service. The gold thread inside the lantern trembled. Vosrin saw what she had done. His voice sharpened. Remove the vessel from the sentence. Evara looked up at him through the blue fire. No. Kaedric's hand tightened at his side. Evara pressed her cut palm against the ledger beside the false charge. Morath recorded the ceiling. The crypt answered slowly. Ash rose from the floor in thin gray lines and gathered around the page. Not flame. Not blessing. Record. The old archive did not care that Vosrin feared it, or that Kaedric suffered beyond the seal. It cared only that an act had occurred, while witness remained active. Letters formed beneath her name. Active witness sealed. Convicted name unresolved. Royal pulse damaged by arch-lanterner strike. Seal ordered before full record completed. The blue fire flickered. Above the nobles went quiet. Vosrin lowered his rod toward the seal. Archive response under confinement is inadmissible. Evara's mouth curved without warmth. Then why are you afraid it can still write? His face hardened. Kaedric spoke from beyond the fire, his voice rough but steady. Read the lines aloud. No one moved. The lesser scribe on the stair looked at Vosrin, then at the king, then at the burning ledger below. Kaedric's eyes did not leave the page. Read them. The scribe swallowed. Active witness sealed. Convicted name unresolved. Royal pulse damaged by arch-lanterner strike. Seal ordered before full record completed. The words climbed the stair and entered the court. The seal shuddered once. Vosrin turned sharply toward the scribe. You read without office permission. He read by royal witness, Kaedric said. You are not whole enough to witness. The court heard that. So did Morath. The ledger wrote another line. Arch-lanterner disputes living royal witness after damaging royal pulse. Kaedric's expression went cold. Evara let the line stand in silence. It did more damage than any accusation she could have shaped. Vosrin's grip tightened around the rod. For a moment, the custody mark burned through his sleeve. Then he recovered the only ground he had left. Fine, he said. Let Morath write its little truths. They do not change the beginning. She touched the unnumbered lantern. She awakened the royal pulse. She brought the king's hidden weakness into public danger. There it was. The final reshaping. Not thief now. Threat. Evara looked down at the gold thread inside the broken lantern. Morath, she said, if my touch is named danger. Read what made my touch necessary. The crypt went still. Even the blue fire seemed to hold its breath. Vosrin said no archive can read necessity from a convicted hand. Evara pressed her bleeding wrist harder into the page. Then read it from the order of events. The unnumbered lantern beat. Not strong. Enough. The ledger turned back through its own pages. Past Vosrin's impact. Past Oren's restored name. Past the recovery seal. Past the first 4 lines that had begun the unburial of 7 years. The page stopped at a blank sheet that smelled faintly of burned silk. Words rose in dark gold. Dragon King Kaedric Mor entered recovery chamber dying. Royal Heartflame leaving body. Evara Lune caught, leaving Heartflame before royal death. Oren Hale preserved witness. Vosrin Hale prepared theft charge after transfer. The seal cracked at the base. A thin sound moved through the court above. Not pity. Not yet. Recognition had to cut through pride before it became shame. Kaedric stared at the page as if the lines had reached into his chest and torn open the silence that had lived there for years. Evara did not look at him for comfort. She was past comfort. She looked at the court. You heard the order, she said. Her voice did not need to rise. Morath carried it. I did not touch the lantern because I wanted his flame. I touched it because your sentence sent me to count every dead ember in this crypt. I did not awaken danger. I awakened the record you buried under my name. The false words beneath the broken lantern smoked. Flame thief blurred, then returned stubborn as old cruelty. Vosrin saw the charge weakening and struck quickly. The line says she caught the flame. That is possession. Possession of royal heart flame by a servant remains theft, unless authorized by recovery office. Evara almost laughed. 7 years ago that sentence would have broken something in her. Now it only showed her where to press. Then read authorization, she said. Vosrin's face stilled. Kaedric looked up. What authorization? Evara touched the line bearing Oren Hale's name. If Oren preserved witness, he either condemned me or authorized custody. Morath read which. The broken lantern flared inward. Oren's dead voice came through the cracked glass, faint but clear. Authorized. A gasp rose from the stair. The ledger wrote beneath the voice. Emergency witness custody granted by Senior Arch-Lanterner Oren Hale. Custody granted to living bearer until royal pulse stabilized. Bearer name not to be criminalized. The sentence under the lantern split. Flame thief cracked down the center. Vosrin's rod shook in his hand. He took 1 step down, stopping at the edge of the blue seal. Oren Hale was dying. His authority cannot be trusted. Evara looked at him. But his signature was trusted when you used it to blame him. The court went silent. Kaedric's eyes moved to Vosrin. Vosrin's face did not change, but the mark in his palm burned brighter. The kingdom needed a stable story. And I was the stable story, Evara said. No one answered. That was answer enough. For 7 years they had not needed to understand her. They had needed her to hold the shape of guilt so the miracle above her could remain clean. A servant could be searched, whispered about buried. A king's recovery could remain holy. A dead lanterner could remain unnamed. An ambitious successor could inherit office without ash on his hands. The ledger wrote as if it had been waiting for that silence. False charge used to stabilize public recovery. Evara closed her eyes for 1 breath. When she opened them, she did not feel powerful. She felt tired. That mattered more. Power could dazzle a court. Tired truth could make it ashamed. Kaedric stepped close to the seal. Blue fire reflected in the gold of his eyes. Evara. She looked at him. He did not say, forgive me. Not there. Not with the court watching, not while she stood behind a barrier built from the same system that had buried her. Forgiveness asked too much from the wounded when justice had not yet finished walking. Instead, he bowed his head. Only once. To the record. To her. To the truth standing between them. Then he turned to the court above. Read the last line aloud. No one dared. Kaedric's voice hardened. All of you. The first voice was the lesser scribe's. Shaking. False charge used to stabilize public recovery. Then Lady Soreth, pale and unwilling. False charge used to stabilize public recovery. Then the guards. Then the nobles. The line traveled upward through Morath's stair, carried by mouths that had once smiled at Evara's punishment. False charge used to stabilize public recovery. The seal cracked again. This time the fracture ran high enough for sound to pass cleanly between them. Evara placed her palm over her name. Morath, she said, read the charge as it should have been written. Vosrin lunged toward the seal. Kaedric moved faster. Not across the line. He placed himself before it, blocking Vosrin's reach without touching Evara, without touching the record. His voice came low. No more. Vosrin's eyes blazed. If that charge changes, your recovery becomes unlawful. Kaedric did not look away. Then let my recovery stand before the law it used to bury her. The ledger burned bright enough to throw gold across every dead lantern in Morath. Not lighting them. Only making them visible. One by one, the black glass bodies reflected the page where Evara's sentence began to change. Evara Lune remained. Flame thief burned away. Buried service trembled. New words formed slowly beneath her name. Evara Lune. Flame custody witness. Living bearer under false charge. Buried service. The line stopped. The blue seal screamed. Vosrin had driven his rod into the fire itself, forcing the barrier to thicken around the unfinished record. The new charge flickered, caught between truth and closure. Evara rose to her feet. The broken lantern beat once beneath her sentence. Kaedric stood on the other side, unable to reach without ruining the witness. Vosrin smiled through the blue blaze, sweat bright on his upper lip. Let the court decide whether an unfinished record can free a convicted woman. Morath answered before the court could. The unfinished line began to write again, slower now, cutting itself through the seal. Buried service unlawful. The blue fire split open from floor to stair, and for the first time in 7 years Evara Lune's name stood in the Dragon Court record without the word thief beside it. The silence after Evara's name was cleared did not feel like peace. It felt like a court learning how heavy one missing word could be. Thief was gone. For 7 years that word had walked ahead of her into every hall. It had entered kitchens before she did. It had stood beside her in corridors. It had lowered eyes, tightened mouths, turned kindness into risk. Now the Morath Lantern Crypt had burned it from the record, and no one above the stair seemed to know where to place their shame. Evara stood behind the split blue seal, one hand. Still marked with blood, the broken, unnumbered lantern at her feet. Her name glowing on the ledger without its old wound. Evara Lune. Flame custody witness. Living bearer under false charge. Buried service unlawful. The words were not soft. They did not embrace her. They did not give back 7 years. But they stood. Vosrin Hale stared at them as if a blade had been placed against his throat, and still he did not surrender. Men like him did not need innocence when they had consequence. He lifted the black and white rod and turned to the court above. If that record stands, he said then, the Dragon King's recovery was made through unlawful custody. Every decree signed after his survival can be questioned. Every treaty sworn under his restored flame can be challenged. Every rival house will call his reign built on a servant's disputed claim. The nobles stirred. There it was again. Fear offered as wisdom. Evara watched them lean toward it. Not all the way. Not as easily as before, but enough. Vosrin saw the movement and pressed harder. You may pity her. You may dislike the sentence. But pity cannot be allowed to unmake a kingdom. Kaedric stood between Vosrin and the broken seal. He still looked wounded. His chest rose unevenly. Gold flickered in his eyes in torn pieces rather than flame. But when he spoke, the entire stair went still. Then let the kingdom learn what held it upright. Vosrin's mouth thinned. Majesty. No. Kaedric's voice cut him off without heat. You do not get to hide behind my crown after using it to bury her. The words landed cleanly. Evara felt them, but did not step toward him. This was not rescue yet. This was repair beginning where damage had been public. Kaedric turned toward the ledger. Morath has read her corrected charge. Read the office charge. Vosrin went still. Evara understood what he feared. Her name had been corrected, but his had not yet been sentenced. The record had named his acts separately. Strike seal, false charge removal. Now the court needed the shape of the whole crime. She stepped closer to the ledger. The blue fire parted just enough for her voice to carry without distortion. Read what Vosrin Hale made Morath hold. The broken lantern pulsed. Oren Hale's restored name brightened beside the cracked glass. The dead man did not speak this time. He did not need to. The record had enough. Ash rose from every line connected to Vosrin's hand and gathered on a clean page. Vosrin Hale, succeeding Arch-Lanterner. Requested transfer before senior death confirmed. Lowered inner recovery seal. Prepared servant theft charge after authorized custody. Removed Oren Hale's death name. Struck active heartflame vessel. Ordered seal before full record completed. The court did not murmur now. It listened. Vosrin's face had become pale and hard, but his voice remained steady. All acts performed under Crown Preservation Doctrine. Evara looked at him. Then read whether preservation required my conviction. The ledger answered at once. No. One word. No ornament. No room for doctrine to hide. Kaedric's hand tightened beside him. Evara felt the court shift again. This time not toward fear, toward the ugly recognition that a necessary cruelty had just been stripped of necessity. Vosrin's eyes flashed. The archive does not understand politics. No, Evara said. It understands custody. That is why you used politics to silence it. The line struck him. Not because it was loud, because it left nothing to argue with. The ledger wrote beneath his charge. Office authority abused to rename lawful burden as theft. False conviction maintained for public recovery. Dead witness removed to protect succeeding hand. The white rod in Vosrin's grip cracked from tip to base. Every lanterner on the stair took one step back. Vosrin looked at them sharply. Hold your offices. But no one moved forward. Morath had not lit every lantern. It had not crowned Evara in fire. It had done something more dangerous to men of record. It had made association costly. Kaedric looked to the guards near the stair. Remove his rod. Vosrin smiled then. Small, cold, desperate. By what authority? A king whose heart flame remains in disputed custody. A woman whose corrected charge is not pardon. A dead lanterner, whose name was restored through a broken vessel. Evara bent and picked up the chain still fastened. Around her wrist. The court watched her. Kaedric watched her. She did not hand it to him. She laid it across the corrected line of her own record. This restraint was placed under the word thief, she said. That word is gone. Read whether the chain still has lawful hold. The ledger burned gold. False restraint void. Chain authority ended. Only then did Evara lift her wrist. The cuff opened. No king broke it. No guard unlocked it. No lover freed her. The record did. The iron fell into the ash with a sound so small it seemed impossible that 7 years could end inside it. Evara did not move for one breath. Then another. Her wrist felt too light. Kaedric bowed his head. Not in triumph. In witness. Vosrin's eyes darkened. A chain falling is not judgment, no, Evara said. But it means I can stand before one without your sentence holding my hand. She stepped through the split seal. This time, Kaedric did not reach for her. He made space. That mattered. Evara walked past him to the foot of the stair, close enough for the nobles to see the blood on her palm and the bruise where the cuff had been. Close enough for Vosrin to understand that she no longer needed to speak from below. Read the public reversal, she said. The lesser scribe stared at her. What wording? Evara looked toward the ledger. Not wording. Truth, Morath answered from behind her. The voice was not Oren's. Not Kaedric's. Not hers. It was chain ash glass and record. Evara Lune did not steal Royal Heartflame. Evara Lune bore Royal Heartflame under emergency witness custody. Evara Lune was falsely convicted to preserve a public recovery record. Evara Lune's buried service is unlawful. Oren Hale did not betray royal recovery. Oren Hale witnessed and preserved lawful custody before death. Vosrin Hale removed death name and prepared false charge. The court heard every line. There was no applause. Good. Applause would have made them feel generous. Silence made them feel implicated. Vosrin lifted his broken rod one last time. If you take my office, Morath loses its keeper. The ledger turned. A final line formed beneath his name. Keeper who buries living witness forfeits dead archive. The black keys at Vosrin's belt fell. Not thrown, not torn away. They simply dropped from their ring one by one, striking the stair like small verdicts. The white rod went dark. Vosrin Hale stood in his robes with empty hands. For the first time in the Dragon Court's memory, the Arch-Lanterner had no light. Kaedric looked at the guards. Hold him for judgment. Vosrin did not resist. He looked only at Evara. You think a clean name restores what carrying his heart took from you. The cruelty found its mark. Evara did not flinch, but something inside her went quiet. Because he was right, in the only way that still mattered. The record had cleared her. The chain had fallen. Orin's name had returned. Vosrin's office had been stripped, but 7 years of carrying Kaedric's missing heart flame had not left her untouched. The cold under her ribs remained. The broken lantern behind her gave one uneven beat. Kaedric heard it. So did she. Morath wrote one last line before the page cooled. False charge reversed. Hidden burden unresolved. The court looked from the lantern to Evara. Kaedric took one step toward her, then stopped himself. His voice came low enough that only the closest witnesses heard. What did my life cost you? Evara looked at him, at the man whose heart she had carried before he ever knew her name, and answered with the truth no record had yet been brave enough to read. More than your court has paid. The broken lantern beat again. This time the sound came from beneath Evra's ribs. The heartbeat beneath Evra's ribs was not Kaedric's. That was the first truth Morath had not yet taught the court to understand. Kaedric heard it and went still. The nobles on the stair leaned forward, hungry for another impossible thing to name wrong. Vosrin, held between two guards with his keys fallen and his rod dead, watched with the cold patience of a man hoping one last wound might undo every judgment before it. There, he said softly. You hear it. The hidden burden remains in her. How do you know she did not keep part of the royal pulse for herself? Kaedric turned toward him, but Evara spoke first. You are finished naming my body before the record does. The words cut cleanly through Morath. Vosrin's mouth closed. Evara walked back to the ledger. The broken, unnumbered lantern rested across the corrected charge, its gold thread faint, its glass cracked inward from Vosrin's strike. Orin Hale's name still glowed beside it. Her own name stood without thief beside it. But beneath her ribs the old cold had begun to beat around something that was neither royal flame nor dead witness. It was what remained after 7 years of carrying another life without consent, without honor, without even the mercy of being believed. She placed one hand over her chest. Morath, she said. Read what remained in the living bearer after royal heart flame was taken. Sealed, struck, and witnessed. The ledger did not answer at once. For the first time, the archive seemed to hesitate before pain that was not an object, not an office, not a seal. Then ash lifted from the page and formed a single line. Burden scar retained. The court did not understand. Kaedric did. She saw it in his face. Saw the wound open there, the knowledge that her suffering had not ended when his flame left her body. That saving him had not simply burned and passed away. It had carved a chamber inside her, where warmth never fully returned. Vosrin laughed under his breath. A scar is not a debt of law. Evara turned toward him. No. That is why men like you prefer scars. Kaedric stepped closer to the ledger slowly enough that no one could call it interference. He looked at the line then at Evara. Can it be healed? The question was quiet. It did not ask whether his heart could be made whole first. That mattered. Evara's throat tightened. But she did not soften the truth for him. Not by pretending it was noble. The ledger warmed. Cost cannot be restored by silence. Kaedric bowed his head once. Then he turned to the court. Every noble guard, scribe, and lanterner above the stair stood trapped between the crypt and the public shame they had helped preserve. They had repeated her corrected record. They had watched her chain fall. But guilt without action was only another polished hall. Kaedric removed the ember heart clasp from his cloak. It was the clasp that marked royal life preserved after the assassination. For 7 years, the court had worn copies of it during survival feasts, Servants polished it. Nobles toasted it. Lanterners bowed before it. Kaedric set it on the ledger beside Evara's sentence. I place the symbol of my survival under Morath record, he said. No feast, oath, decree, or court honor bearing this recovery shall stand clean until Evara Lune's false conviction, or inhales erased death, and every buried record tied to that recovery are read aloud before the Dragon Court. The court recoiled. That was cost. Not a gentle apology in a crypt. Not a private regret. Public consequence reaching into every polished chamber that had benefited from her disgrace. Evara looked at him. He did not look away. Vosrin's face tightened. You would stain your own reign. Kaedric's answer came without hesitation. It was already stained. I am naming the ash. The ledger accepted the clasp. Gold fire ran through its dragon heart curve and then into the page. Royal survival honor suspended. Pending full public reading. Oren Hale restored as lawful witness. Evara Lune restored as flame custody witness. All records under false recovery doctrine to be opened. A sound passed through the court. Fear. Anger. Relief in a few hidden corners where old servants stood behind noble shoulders and understood perhaps for the first time that Morath might remember more than kings. Evara felt the line settle through her. Restored. The word did not heal everything, but it stood where Thief had stood. Kaedric faced Vosrin. Arch-Lanterner Vosrin Hale by Morath record. And royal witness, your office is stripped, pending judgment. Vosrin's empty hands curled. And if the opened records weaken you, Kaedric glanced at Evara, then at the broken lantern. Then I will rule weaker and truer than I ruled whole on a lie. For the first time, Vosrin had no answer. The guards took him up the stair. No blade. No blood. No dramatic death for the court to use as spectacle. Just a man of records led away by the records he had abused, his dead rod, hanging useless at his side. When he disappeared beyond the stair, Morath did not rejoice. It opened. The blue seal faded from the stones. Dead lantern chains loosened overhead. Not all lanterns lit. They were not miracles waiting for spectacle, but their black glass shifted toward the ledger, as if thousands of dead archives had turned to witness the first correction in years. Evara stood very still. The court waited for Kaedric to take her hand. He did not. He understood enough now not to make her freedom look like his possession. Instead, he stepped back from the ledger and said, "What do you require before the heart flame is returned fully?" A murmur rose at once. Evara heard the fear beneath it. The king was still damaged. His missing pulse was not entirely restored. The realm wanted him whole. Courts always wanted women to finish bleeding quickly when power was uncomfortable. She looked at the broken lantern. The gold thread inside it answered Kaedric faintly. The part of his heart flame that had passed through witness was alive but not whole. It could return. She knew that now. But not through another hidden act. Not through gratitude twisted into obligation. Not through a court staring at her as if her dignity were the final obstacle to royal comfort. She lifted her chin. 3 things. Kaedric nodded. Name them. Oren Hale's record is read before mine. A flicker moved through his face, surprise giving way to respect. He died witnessing what I carried, Evara said. The dead should not stand behind the living simply because the living can still speak. The ledger wrote, Oren Hale to be read first. Evara continued. Every servant, healer, guard, and lanterner punished under the false recovery doctrine is named. Not pardoned in a corner. Named. A few servants in the upper shadows began to cry silently. Kaedric's voice roughened. Granted. The ledger wrote again. Buried names to be opened. Evara placed her hand over the burdened scar beneath her ribs. And the last thing Kaedric asked. She looked at him. You do not ask me to return what remains until I choose it before witness. Not for the throne. Not for your pain. Not because the court wants the story clean before dawn. Kaedric absorbed that. Around them the nobles shifted in discomfort. A king in pain was a problem they understood. A woman's consent delaying royal repair offended every habit of the court. Kaedric turned, so they could all hear him. No one asks Evara Lune for hidden sacrifice again. The ledger accepted the line. No hidden burden may be transferred without bearer consent. Only then did the broken lantern brighten. not because it chose her, because the terms were true. Gold unfolded inside the cracked glass, gentle and tired, like something wounded being allowed to cross a room without being dragged. Kaedric stood motionless as the thread lifted from the lantern and moved toward him across the open ledger. It passed over Oren Hale's restored name, over Evara Lune's corrected charge, over the line forbidding hidden burden. Then it entered his chest. Kaedric closed his eyes. This time, he did not fall. The first full beat struck through him like a bell under stone. Morath answered with a low tremor. The second beat came slower. Changed. Not the old rhythm the court had celebrated. Not the false wholeness he had worn for 7 years. This heartbeat carried a scar in it now. A pause where silence had been named and not erased. Kaedric opened his eyes. He looked stronger, but not untouched. Good, Evara thought. Let the truth leave a mark. The burden beneath her own ribs eased, not vanished. No honest wound disappeared because justice finally arrived late. But the cold chamber inside her stopped beating like a hidden prison. It became still. Hers. No longer a vault for royal life. No longer evidence trapped in flesh. The ledger wrote its final correction. Royal heartflame returned by witnessed consent. Bearer burden released from hidden custody. Scar retained as living record. Evara breathed. For the first time in 7 years, the breath reached the bottom of her chest without finding borrowed fire there. Kaedric stepped closer. Slowly. Stopping far enough away that she could refuse even his nearness. Evara, he said. Her name sounded different now. Not clean because he spoke it. Clean because Morath had. I cannot give back the years, he said. I cannot make ignorance innocent. I cannot ask you to turn pain into forgiveness, because truth has finally shamed us. She held his gaze. What can you do? He looked toward the stair where the court waited under the weight of opened records. Then back to her. I can stand behind the reading. I can put my crown under every name your silence protected. I can let my court learn that my life continued because yours was buried. And if you allow it, I can spend whatever years remain proving that standing beside you is not the same as claiming what you carried. The words did not melt her. They settled. There was room in them for time. For anger. For refusal. For something that might grow, only if it was never forced. Evara walked past him. Up the stair. The court parted before her. Not because she was queen. Not because she was bride. Not because a dragon had chosen her beneath the earth. Because the record had changed, and she had walked out before the king. At the top of the stair, the banquet hall waited beyond open doors, still bright with survival garlands and golden cups abandoned. When Kaedric fell, every decoration suddenly looked like a lie, awaiting correction. Evara stopped at the threshold. Behind her, Kaedric removed his crown again, not in collapse, in witness. He held it at his side and stood one step behind her. The first servant in the hall lowered her head, then an old healer, then a guard whose face twisted with shame. Not applause, not worship, recognition. Evara looked at the long table where the court had celebrated 7 years of a life bought by her silence. Bring the recovery records, she said. No one moved quickly enough. Kaedric's voice came from behind her, low and absolute. You heard the flame custody witness. This time they obeyed her, and as the first sealed record was carried into the hall, the dead lantern beneath Morath gave one final distant beat, not of a king's missing heart but of a buried truth finally allowed to live above ground.